This morning, that victory lap that Texas Democrats took in D.C. Is anything going to come of it? State Rep Trey Martinez Fischer made the trip and spoke to us just before he returned to Texas. Building a border wall is now front and center for Governor Abbott, but that idea originated from one of his opponents, former State Senator Don Huffines. We'll talk to him in a moment. The pandemic forced Dallas City Hall to change how it does business. Councilman Casey Thomas outlines exactly how and the new priorities currently underway. And more problems with the Texas electricity grid. Why aren't state leaders talking about it?
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning to our viewers across the state. Let's begin here, as always, with the top political headlines here in Texas. Let's start with the backstory on Congress making Juneteenth a federal holiday. This passed with bipartisan support, but there were two Texas Republicans who voted against it. Chip Roy there from Austin and Ronnie Jackson from the Panhandle. Congressman Jackson here said he supports the state holiday for Juneteenth, but said he does not like the idea of federal workers getting the day off. And another vote in Congress caught our attention. Democrats and Republicans voted together overwhelmingly to give congressional gold medals to U.S. Capitol police officers who served on January 6th. But there were three Texas Republicans who voted against awarding those medals. Chip Roy from Austin again, Michael Cloud there from Victoria, and Louis Gohmert from Tyler. Congressman Gohmert there suggested the bill was just partisan politics. And a surprising announcement from State Rep James White. He is a Republican from Southeast Texas and has chaired several important committees in the Texas House of Representatives. Representative White says he will not run for re-election next year, but told me that he is considering a statewide run, though he did not say for what position. But let's begin this morning with that trip to Washington, D.C. Texas Democrats spent the week there taking a victory lap of sorts, even welcomed as heroes for walking out of the legislature and killing Republican attempts to change voting laws in the state. But besides those photo opportunities and press conferences, what, if anything, will come from those visits? Our first guest is State Rep Trey Martinez Fischer. He made the trip, a Democrat from San Antonio, and spoke to us just before flying home. Trey, it's good to see you again. I want to talk to you about your visit to D.C. You said the other day that Democrats lit a small spark that ignited a national debate and then took that small spark up to D.C. What are you coming home with, though, specifically that will help the Democratic cause in this state?
I am coming home with a very raspy voice, I'll tell you that, and some very hurt feet from walking miles and miles around this U.S. Capitol. Listen, make no mistake. I think that, we recognized at some point on Sunday that the eyes of the nation were watching us. The President of the United States had issued a statement calling Senate Bill 7 un-American, undemocratic. And we knew that the moment was bigger than 67 Democrats in a legislative chamber in Austin. We come home having done our part to persuade and to thank and support our United States senators that really have a tough decision to make on adopting S1, which is the For the People Act, and to get a timeline on the John Lewis Act.
Well, let's talk about one of those there, because you met privately with West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin's staff the other day, about 45 minutes with him. He's the single Democrat that had been kind of holding up this federal law that would essentially override Republican state legislatures across the country. Manchin, though, now appears to be on board with some changes. Not sure if the rest of the Democrats are. Senate Republicans, though, still plan to do what you guys did in Texas, and that's block passage of it in the U.S. Senate. How likely do you think a federal law is? What's realistic?
Well, I will say I think there's a significant momentum for Senator Manchin to say that he would now support S1 with his recommended changes, even without Republican support. And so not, separating the policy from the actual filibuster, some very strong deal points on policy. He's talking about making elections a national holiday. He's talking about having pretty much no excuse absentee voting, 15 days of early voting, not just voter ID, but multiple alternatives for people to vote with the utility bill, for instance. And really, one thing that I found fascinating, he also has a provision that says if you run for president of the United States, or if you are president of the United States, you have to disclose your income taxes. And so
Does any of that have a shot of passing, though? Because you need at least 60 Republicans right now, unless the filibuster goes away, then it's 55, and the Senate's still split 50-50.
And I think, in those conversations, as they're moving, I think it's sort of one piece at a time, one step at a time. 2 days ago, Senator Manchin didn't want anything to do with S1. Now he's on board with S1.
Let's talk about Texas politics again here for a moment. If Texas Democrats cannot stop a bill like this again in a special session, what do Democrats do next?
That's a great question. And I think that the thing we need to focus on is the House has already expressed its will in a House Bill 6, which looks nothing like Senate Bill 7, doesn't have any of those sharp edges, any of the discriminatory language. It's still not a bill I can support, but it doesn't charge anybody with a felony for making a mistake like Senate Bill 7 does. And remember this, Jason, the Speaker of the House is not elected by Republican voters statewide. At this point, he's elected by Democrats and Republicans in the Texas House, which means when it comes to our policy, there ought to be parameters. And if the Speaker of the House is going to govern being mindful of who his true constituents are, then we're going to see something more reflective of House Bill 6, which, again, is miles different than Senate Bill 7. So that's a good start.
Last question here for you, too. Let's say Texas Republicans are successful in getting something passed, over the objections of Texas Democrats. What do you think voting actually looks like next year here in Texas during the primary?
I think we'll have more participation because people are vaccinated and COVID's coming under control. And I also think that we are doing a very good job in the state of Texas. More and more people are voting. When we talk about voter suppression as a solution, looking for a problem, the only problem that I can see right now, Jason, is that people are voting. And I guess those that are in charge right now just don't like how they're voting. And so they want to do something about it.
All right. Representative Trey Martinez Fischer, we appreciate the time. Safe travels back to you.
Thank you, Jason.
Let's talk about a tweet now that did not age well. A couple of weeks ago, Governor Abbott tweeted that everything that needed to be done was done to fix the power grid in Texas. So why then, Texans are asking, were we told to conserve electricity again last week? Power plants were having mechanical trouble and couldn't produce enough electricity, but this again raises questions about the reliability of the Texas power grid, and specifically, did Texas lawmakers really get anything done? Let's pose this question to Ross Ramsey, the co-founder and executive editor of the Texas Tribune. Good morning to you, Ross.
Good morning, Jason. How are you?
We're doing well here. Governor Abbott and state leaders wanted to talk about trying to build a border wall last week. Why aren't state leaders talking more about these grid problems?
Well, they'd like to put the grid problems behind them. It was a state failure. It was on their watch. They passed some legislation and can claim that they did something. I'm not sure you could make the full claim the governor did. That looks a little bit like George W. Bush putting up a mission accomplished sign. But as we go into the summer, we've got some of the problems that we've had in previous summers, which is that it's really hot. Some of the plants are down on days when the wind's not blowing and those turbines aren't turning. You have the problem, another version of the problem that you had in February, which is demand outstripping supply.
Yeah, indeed so, and maybe it does look like that mission accomplished issue there. But let's talk for a moment about what Governor Abbott wants to talk about, and that is the border wall. He's asking for donations, but he admitted the other day there's no land to actually build this thing, which I presume gives him an out. How likely is this to actually be constructed?
I think if you go to actual construction, it's really problematic and it's really slow. You've got a bunch of property rights fights. You've got a bunch of building fights. You've got a tremendous amount of money that you'd have to spend. He'd have all of the same problems that Donald Trump had trying to get walls built for 4 years. As a matter of politics, I think it works. This is a top concern of Republican voters. There is, in fact, a surge of migrants at the border, and he looks like he's doing something.
And likely to drive people to the polls. You're right about that. Ross, back to you in a moment. Coming up, before Governor Abbott unveiled his plan for a state-constructed border wall, the idea was first floated by one of Abbott's Republican opponents. Former State Senator Don Huffines is with us in a moment. And the city of Dallas finally catching up on building permits from the pandemic. Councilman Casey Thomas with us about changes at City Hall and Dallas's new priorities. You're watching Inside Texas Politics. Texans have lived with foundation problems, but the state now faces a new foundation problem, and Dallas is the worst in the country for this. Experts explain why in our latest episode of Y'all-itics. If your phone is handy, aim its camera here at the QR code on your screen. It will take you directly to this episode. And this reminder, we drop new episodes every Tuesday. You know, Dallas really dropped the ball during the pandemic, at least as far as building permits are concerned. The city was not ready, got way behind, and left builders and residents waiting for months just to get City Hall to sign off on simple forms. Dallas is said to have figured it out, though, and finally eliminated that backlog. City Hall is now looking at new priorities, some of which we talked about with Councilman Casey Thomas. Good morning, Councilman. Let's start with the city's permitting process. It has been horrible over the past year or so since everyone went into COVID, but the city is making strides and has eliminated this backlog to the relief of so many builders and homeowners, et cetera. Tell us how in the world this happened.
Yeah. Well, good morning, Jason. Happy Juneteenth.
That's right.
What they've done is they've hired some private contractors to come in to really address that backlog. And so that's been limited. One of the challenges we have is we're still kind of functioning within COVID restrictions. Once we get staff back in person full-time, people have to submit their plans online. And this is something we haven't had to do in the past. They could usually just come to the center, permitting office, drop them off, or have them approved their own site. When will everything be back to normal, Councilman? Well, I think maybe in the next 30 days, we're getting updates on the return to work. TC Broadnex has laid out a timeline, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And so within the next 30 days, I believe we should be, either 100%, almost 100%. And that's going to make a tremendous difference. Residents in Dallas know that a brand new slate of council members was just elected. You are one of the most senior now as an incumbent. Give us the top 2 priorities for city council in this new term. Well, definitely public safety is always a top priority. We just saw the other day, yesterday, where a 6-year-old was killed by, her mother, someone they're saying was a suspect, stabbed a 16-year-old. And so we want to make sure that public safety is a priority. People know we're on the job. We have had issues in terms of the number of 911 operators. That has been a challenge, but I talked to the director. He's making that a priority. We're trying to get people hired and get them through training in a timely manner. But we want to make sure that once they're on the phone, that they know how to address concerns and they're professionally trained and they have time in order to do that. But public safety is definitely number one. And then back to the basics. The mayor talked about this at the inauguration. We've been through a lot. The residents of the city of Dallas have been through a lot with COVID-19. And so we want to make sure that they know whatever changes with our city processes due to COVID, that their services and their requests are being answered and being responded to in a timely manner. So making sure that we take care of the basics. And then also looking down the road, I'm excited about us passing our economic development policy and plan with a focus on areas south of 30, so we can see equity in economic development in our service distribution and infrastructure. And then most importantly, making sure our budget is done in an equitable manner.
Good deal. Councilman, good luck to you guys. We appreciate the time.
Thanks, Jason. It's always a pleasure.
The state of Texas building its own border wall is now front and center of Governor Greg Abbott's reelection campaign. But that idea was first floated by another Republican. Don Huffines, a former state senator from Dallas, who recently announced he too is running against Abbott in next year's GOP primary. Senator Huffines, it's good to see you again. I want to start out with the talk from the governor about wanting to build a state-constructed border wall. If my memory serves correct, you proposed this idea first. Did Abbott steal your idea?
Well, he certainly did. He really did. And, this is my idea to secure the border is just resonating so well with Republican voters, because not only do I want to finish Trump's wall or build a Texas wall, but I'm going to do whatever is necessary to secure our border, because this is an invasion, and I'm not going to be asking permission from the federal government to secure Texas's border. I can tell you real quickly what I am going to do to secure the border, because this is a battle against the cartels, the most evil, violent criminal organizations on earth. And they're making hundreds of millions of dollars in human trafficking. No illegals cross that border without paying them. Sex trafficking, drug smuggling, murders, rapes, you name it. There's 25 crossings over the river that Texas has. I'm going to close every single one of those in one day because I'm the actual Republican running, and I'm actually going to solve this problem once and for all. I'm going to close those crossings down for all inbound commercial traffic from Mexico. We're going to make Mexico acquiesce economically to secure their side of the river and stop these cartels.
But wouldn't that hurt Texas businesses if you shut down commercial traffic?
Yes, but Texas, here's the thing. I'm going to communicate to Mexico, and they know it. They need us a lot more than we need them. And this is a proven tactic that can work, and it's going to work. We don't have an option. We have to secure Texas's border and stop these cartels and this invasion. And I'm not going to be asking permission from the federal government to do that.
Well, let me ask you a question that reporters asked to Governor Abbott the other day. Texas doesn't physically have any land on which to build any physical barriers. How would the state get land? How would you get land to actually put a wall up or a fence up?
Well, look, Texas does have condemnation authority, of course. We condemn for highways. First, we'll work with landowners that want to cooperate. But this is not an option we have. We're going to have up to 2 million illegals in Texas this year that aren't supposed to be here. And the cost for Texas taxpayers is billions and billions of dollars every year. Education, healthcare, incarceration, law enforcement, you name it. I can go down the list. This is a huge burden on Texas taxpayers.
Here's a question for you, Senator. Greg Abbott, as you probably know, has turned far right in the past few months, but he also has $40 million cash on hand in his campaign account, a two-time incumbent. Why did you decide to run against him?
Well, it's really because the job, I don't need a job. The job's just not getting done. Look, Texans are smart. And Republicans are tired of being lied to. We're just tired of broken and empty promises. The border's not secure. Our property taxes keep going up and up. We don't have confidence in our election. Look, I can go on and on. But the bottom line is that my opponent's a career politician and 31 years in office. He's interested in his career.
Senator Huffines, we appreciate the time.
Thank you for having me, Jason.
Coming up, we will end our program where we began. That victory lap for Texas Democrats in D.C. What did they get out of that trip? We'll talk about that next on the Roundtable.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Ross Ramsey is back with us from Austin in the Texas Tribune. Bud Kennedy is here from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and Abby Livingston is here. She is the D.C. Bureau Chief for the Texas Tribune and the nation's capital. Abby, let's start with you because that's what we're talking about for this segment, and that is the Texas Democrats' victory lap there in D.C. Is anything going to come of that besides just the photo ops and the press coverage?
I am skeptical that there will be much movement on this. They did have much success in getting into some meetings with very important players, but I don't see any evidence that they're going to have more success in moving the ball forward on policy in Washington when everything else is a stalemate.
And they did get some meetings like with Joe Manchin, Bud, and with Speaker Pelosi, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren. Is the national attention, is that likely to change anything?
Well, I think this is what they were playing for with the walkout, with when they ended the legislative session in Texas in the House. I think all they could hope for was to play for time and draw more attention to the cause and see if they could argue their case over the span of the summer. They get more attention to it. I'm not sure they'll have any success.
So Ralston, the question to me is, what was the point of going through for all this? Is it just the positive press coverage?
Well, I think it's partly what Abby said and partly what Bud said. They get some press coverage and they get a hope that if you stretch this out, some of these provisions are so egregious that they die in the sunlight. There was a souls to the polls thing that moved the voting time on Sundays during early voting, that when people got to look at it, even the Republican sponsors ran away from it. So they're hoping that some of these provisions just won't last out in public view.
And there were, I think a dozen or so, Abby, Texas Democrats who went to D.C. Is there any one of them who are emerging kind of like Wendy Davis did 6, 7, 8 years ago after her filibuster in the Texas Senate?
I I don't think so. They really seem to be moving as a group, and there were different groups meeting with different offices. And so I think that at least, I'll just put it this way. I was the one at the Capitol telling photographers from other news organizations who was who, because they were just seen as a pack of Texans. And, you know, they were loud just like Texans should be.
A pack of Texans. But let me ask you about that then. We did see Jasmine Crockett making appearances on CNN. Of course, she is a Dallas area representative. Trey Martinez Fischer as well. He met with a number of people, including Joe Manchin's staff. Are either of them raising their profile?
They became the Google stars. It's tough to say who really, this is the problem with Texas Democrats right now. They don't have anybody to put on a magazine cover and say, you know, the next great hope. You know, unless Beto O'Rourke tries to run, and then, you know, we'll see if he does come back. But they don't have a star, and there was no star for the Democrats in this legislature. So,
Ross, what then happens as we go into a special session? We presume that the governor is going to call one. What then happens with Democrats and this bill? There's seemingly no way to stop it.
I don't think they can stop it. I think they can knock down some of the provisions and hope for the best. It's a Republican legislature. It's a Republican governor. And, you know, this is going the way it's going. I do think some provisions will fall out. And I also agree that no star has emerged. Everybody's watching McConaughey and O'Rourke and mostly Greg Abbott.
Indeed so. But I told Ross a few moments ago before we began the segment, I went to see Beto O'Rourke here in Dallas the other day. I mean, he's doing this, you know, visit talking about trying to, you know, protect voting laws in the state. This looked like a campaign visit to me, though.
He's making a lot of noise, and he's going around registering. But, you know, this is not a favorable cycle for Democrats. The midterm of a Democratic presidency is not going to work well. The only thing that would encourage him to run would be if Greg Abbott somehow looks weaker, if the opponents look like they may, you know, make a little headway. But right now, it doesn't look like it's going to be a Democratic year.
Guys, thank you so much. We're out of time. We'll see you next week.